Lawyer didn't say anything dramatic. He didn't raise his voice. He just looked up from my phone, set it face down on the conference table, and said 4 words to our CEO. "We need to leave." That was it. No accusations, no ultimatums. Just 4 words that ended a $340 million government contract and took down 2 people who had spent 18 months trying to make sure I didn't exist. Let me take you back to the beginning, because none of this makes sense without the beginning. I had been at Hartwell Consulting for 9 years when the new division head arrived. 9 years. I had started there as a junior analyst fresh out of grad school, eating sad desk lunches and color-coding spreadsheets. Nobody read. By year 4, I was running my own client accounts. By year 7, I was the go-to person for federal procurement strategy, which is a boring way of saying I knew how to help mid-sized companies win contracts with government agencies without getting buried in compliance paperwork. It's not glamorous work, but it pays well and it matters because the companies we worked with were doing real things: infrastructure, healthcare systems, logistics networks for emergency response. When we helped a client win, it wasn't just a financial win. Something actually got built. The contract I'm talking about, the one that became everything, was for a regional hospital network across 3 states looking to modernize their data infrastructure. The Federal Health Agency was co-funding it. Total value, $340 million over 5 years. I had been cultivating the relationship with the client's procurement lead for almost 2 years before the formal RFP even dropped. Her name was Maureen. We'd had coffee, we'd done site visits. I understood exactly what they needed and what the agency reviewers were looking for. I built the proposal framework from scratch, not with a template. From scratch. I had a methodology I called the compliance bridge model, basically a way of structuring proposals so that federal reviewers could cross-reference our clients' capabilities against agency requirements without having to dig. It reduced evaluation friction. It worked. We had won 3 contracts using it in the previous 18 months. That methodology was mine. I had documented it, refined it, trained 2 junior colleagues on it. It lived in a shared drive folder under my name. Then my new division head arrived. His name was Sterling. Late 40s, silver hair, the kind of guy who wore French cuffs on casual Fridays. He came from a larger firm in DC, and he brought with him a reputation for restructuring teams, which, I would learn quickly, meant installing his own people and finding quiet ways to make existing people uncomfortable enough to leave. He was very polite to me at first, praised my work in meetings, asked me to walk him through the hospital network deal in detail, which I did, because why wouldn't I? He was my new boss. I explained the compliance bridge model, the relationship with Maureen, the timeline, the competitive landscape. I gave him everything. 3 weeks later, he assigned a man named Thornton to co-lead the proposal. Thornton had been Sterling's associate at the DC firm. He had 0 experience with federal healthcare procurement. 0. I looked him up. His background was in commercial real estate contracts. Completely different world. But Sterling introduced him in our team meeting as a strategic asset and said the hospital network deal was too large for a single point of contact. I nodded. I said nothing. I went back to my desk and I sat very still for about 10 minutes. That was the first sign. Over the next 6 weeks, I was methodically moved to the edges of my own project. Meetings I had always led were now led by Thornton. Calls with Maureen, which I had built over 2 years, were now routed through him. When I pushed back and said that Maureen and I had an established relationship and that a sudden transition could confuse her team, Sterling said he understood my concern and that he'd keep me in the loop. He did not keep me in the loop. I kept showing up. I kept doing the work. I sent detailed prep notes before every client call. I flagged compliance risks in the draft proposal. I marked up Thornton's sections with corrections because some of what he was writing was factually wrong. He had misunderstood a key federal requirement and framed our client's capabilities in a way that would actually disqualify them during scoring. Thornton thanked me for the feedback in email. In the next version of the document, my corrections were incorporated, but my comments were deleted and the revised language appeared under his name. I noticed. I saved every version. The moment I knew something was really wrong, not just politically annoying but actually wrong, was a Thursday afternoon in February. I had stepped away from my desk to get coffee. When I came back, I had a new email from Sterling. It was addressed to me, Thornton, and the project coordinator. It said, "Per our discussion, please note that Thornton will be taking sole lead on the HN proposal going forward. We're simplifying the structure to streamline client communication. Rachel will transition to support capacity." There had been no discussion. I had not been in any meeting where this was said. I had not been consulted, asked, or warned. Support capacity for a project I had conceived and built from a blank page. I read the email twice. I thought about replying immediately. I thought about walking into Sterling's office. I typed a draft response that used words I can't repeat here, and then I deleted it. I did not reply. Not yet. What I did instead was something I had learned from watching a mentor handle a similar situation years earlier. She had told me, when something feels wrong, document everything and say nothing, because the person trying to push you out is counting on you to react emotionally. Your emotion is their justification. Your silence is your evidence. So I got quiet. I kept doing the work I was asked to do, even in support capacity, but I did one additional thing. I opened the shared drive project folder and really looked at the file structure. What I found took me a minute to process. The original proposal framework folder, the one I had built, the one that contained my compliance bridge documentation, my competitive analysis, my annotated version of the RFP, had been copied. The copies had been moved into a new subfolder under Thornton's directory. My name had been removed from the document headers. In the metadata, the author field on 3 of the core documents had been changed. Not all of them. 3 had been changed. 4 still showed my name. I don't know if it was an oversight or if someone ran out of time. I downloaded everything, every version, every file, the original metadata attached. I did it from my work laptop on a Tuesday morning, logged in normally, through normal access. I was still on the project. I still had access. Everything I downloaded, I was authorized to download. I saved it to a personal external drive that evening. I didn't tell anyone, not my closest colleague, not my husband, not my mother who calls every Sunday and would have had opinions. I just waited. The proposal was submitted in March. I was listed in the appendix under supporting team members. Thornton was listed as lead strategist. The compliance bridge methodology, described in almost exactly the language I had written, appeared in Section 4 under the heading Hartwell's Proprietary Approach with no attribution. I read the final submission on the day it went out. I sat with it for a long time. Then I opened a new folder on my laptop and labeled it simply HN Project, My Files. The agency's evaluation period was 8 weeks. During those 8 weeks, I continued to do my job. I was pleasant in meetings. I answered questions when asked. I prepared a briefing document when Thornton asked me to because he didn't understand one of the compliance sections and needed help before a follow-up call with the agency. I helped him. I sent a thorough, accurate briefing document. I kept a copy. He used it almost verbatim in the follow-up call. I was not on that call. I found out what he said from the project coordinator, who mentioned it casually, not realizing the significance. I made a note. We were shortlisted. Final presentations were scheduled for late May. The client and the agency's review panel would both be in the room. Sterling announced this in a team meeting with visible satisfaction. He congratulated Thornton. He said this was the result of strong leadership and strategic positioning. I smiled. I said, "Great news." I meant none of it. Sterling told me I would not be presenting. My role, he said, would be to sit in with the extended team and provide technical backup if needed. I was essentially a prop, someone to make the room look fuller. I said that was fine. The night before the final presentation, I sent an email. Not to Sterling, not to Thornton, not to Maureen. I sent it to our company's general counsel, a woman named Patricia who I had worked with twice before on compliance matters. She was sharp, and she did not have patience for nonsense. I sent it to her personal work email, not the general legal inbox, and I marked it confidential. I attached the original files, the metadata, the version histories, the email from Sterling saying I was being moved to support capacity with no prior discussion. The briefing document I had written that Thornton had used word for word on the agency call, and a short factual summary, no more than 2 pages, laying out the timeline. The subject line was documentation, HN proposal, potential attribution issue, please review before tomorrow. I did not ask her to do anything specific. I did not ask her to stop the presentation. I said, I want you to have this information. I would like your advice on how to proceed. She called me at 7:42 that evening. The conversation lasted 11 minutes. At the end of it, she said, don't say anything tomorrow. I'll be in the room. I barely slept. My husband asked me what was wrong, and I said I was just anxious about a work thing. He brought me tea. I sat at the kitchen table at 2 a.m., going over the documents one more time, not because I needed to, I had them memorized, but because sitting still wasn't working. The presentation was at 10 a.m. We arrived as a full team. Patricia was already in the building. I had not seen her in the hallway beforehand. She had come separately. When I walked into the conference room and saw her sitting at the far end of the table near our CEO, a man named Harold, who I had met maybe 4 times in 9 years, I felt my stomach do something complicated. Sterling looked at Patricia. He looked at Harold. He smiled and shook hands and said something about being glad to have the full team present. Patricia smiled back and said nothing. Thornton presented. He was polished. I'll give him that. He was good on his feet. Good with eye contact, good at speaking in the kind of confident, measured cadence that reads as authority in rooms like that one. He went through the proposal methodology. He described, in my words, using my framework, how the compliance bridge model would reduce evaluation friction for the agency reviewers. He called it, in the room, a methodology our team has been refining for several years. Our team, at the 20-minute mark, one of the agency reviewers asked a clarifying question about Section 4, specifically about how the methodology had been validated in previous federal submissions. Thornton gave a general answer. The reviewer wasn't satisfied and pushed for specifics, which prior contracts, what outcomes, who could speak to the technical development. Thornton looked at Sterling, a very brief look, barely a second, but I saw it. Sterling said smoothly, we have detailed documentation we can follow up with in writing. Harold, our CEO, leaned forward slightly. He looked at Patricia. Patricia reached into the folder she had brought and placed a single sheet of paper face down on the table in front of Harold. She didn't say anything. She didn't gesture toward it. She just placed it there. Harold looked at her. She gave a very small nod. He turned the paper over. Read it. It took maybe 30 seconds. His expression didn't change much. Howard was the kind of man who had spent 40 years not letting his face say things before his brain was ready. But something shifted in the set of his jaw. He looked up. Not at Thornton, not at Sterling. He looked directly at me. Could you speak to the technical development? He asked. The room went very quiet, and I did. For about 4 minutes without notes, I walked through the origin of the compliance bridge model, when I had developed it, which prior contracts it had been used on, what the specific outcomes were. I cited case numbers. I named client contacts. I described exactly how the methodology had evolved through 3 iterations. Nobody stopped me. Nobody interrupted. When I finished, the lead agency reviewer said, "That's very helpful, thank you." And then she made a note on her legal pad. Sterling's expression had gone very, very still. The formal presentation wrapped at 11:45. There was a break while the panel conferred. Our team gathered in the hallway near the elevators. Thornton was talking to Sterling in a low voice. I stood slightly apart with my coffee, looking at my phone and not seeing anything on it. Patricia came and stood next to me. She didn't say anything for a moment. Then she said quietly, "Harold wants to speak with you and me before we leave. Conference room B. Give it 5 minutes." She walked away before I could respond. The meeting in conference room B lasted 40 minutes. I brought my laptop. I had everything pulled up. The original files, the metadata, the version histories, the emails. Harold's assistant had gotten him coffee. He sat across from me and he read. He didn't rush. He asked 4 questions. I answered all 4 of them with documentation. At the end, he said, "How long has this been going on?" I told him, "Approximately 8 months from the first reassignment to the present day." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You did the right thing going to Patricia." I said I wasn't sure anyone would care. He looked at me for a second with an expression I couldn't entirely read. "I care," he said. "This firm's reputation is the only thing we actually sell." We were awarded the contract 6 weeks later. The letter came on a Tuesday. I know because Patricia forwarded it to me with no message. Just the forwarded email. Sterling was placed on administrative leave the same week the contract was awarded. I don't know every detail of what happened internally after that. Some of it was handled through HR and legal in ways that weren't shared with me, but I know that by August he was no longer with the company. Thornton submitted his resignation 2 weeks before Sterling's leave was announced. I don't know if he knew what was coming, or if the 2 things were unrelated. I suspect they were not unrelated. The contract was officially transitioned to my oversight in late June. Harold sent an email to the full division introducing me as the lead. It was 3 sentences. It did not mention the previous months or explain the transition. It just said, "Effective immediately. This engagement is under the leadership of our senior strategist. She has our full confidence." Maureen, the procurement lead I had spent 2 years cultivating, called me the day she got the transition notice. She said, "I was wondering when that was going to happen." I laughed for the first time in months. I want to say something about the in-between period. The months when I was being edged out and doing the work anyway and keeping quiet and waiting. Because people ask, when they hear stories like this, "Why didn't you just speak up sooner? Why didn't you go to HR? Why didn't you make noise?" I'll tell you why. Because I had watched what happened to the people who made noise. I had watched a colleague 3 years earlier go to HR over a similar situation, work being attributed to someone else, contributions being minimized, and I had watched HR conduct a review that somehow concluded the situation was a miscommunication and recommended better team communication practices going forward. My colleague left the company 6 months later, not because she wanted to, because the environment became untenable. HR is not there to protect you. That is not a cynical thing to say. It is just an accurate description of what HR's function actually is within a corporation. HR is there to protect the company. Sometimes those interests align with yours. Often they don't. What protects you is documentation, not emotion, not relationships, not how long you've been there, not how well liked you are. Documentation. Contemporaneous, factual, time-stamped documentation that makes it more expensive for the company to ignore you than to deal with the problem. That is what I had. That is the only reason any of this went the way it did. I'm not saying it's fair. It is genuinely exhausting to have to be that disciplined when you're also the one doing the actual work, carrying the actual relationships, and watching someone less competent take credit for it in real time. It is exhausting to smile in the meetings and say nothing and go home and make dinner and sit at the kitchen table at 2 a.m. building your case 1 document at a time. But it worked. There is one more thing I want to tell you because it's the detail that stuck with me most. About a month after the dust had settled, I was cleaning out a project folder and I came across the original email from Sterling, the one that reassigned me to support capacity, the one where he invented a conversation that had never happened. I reread it, and I thought about how casually he had written it, how certain he must have been that I would react badly, make a scene, give him a reason to document me as difficult and emotional and not a team player, or that I would just accept it and slowly fade out of a project I had built, the way people do when they're exhausted and demoralized and just want to stop fighting. He was wrong on both counts. The metadata on that original email? Timestamp 4:17 p.m. on a Thursday. The metadata on my email to Patricia? 9:03 p.m. the night before the final presentation. 5 months between those 2 timestamps. 5 months of keeping receipts. That gap is the whole story. If you've been in a situation like this, if you're in one right now, here is the only advice I have. Not because I'm an expert, because I lived it. Save everything. Save the first version and the last version and every version in between. Save the emails where your name is on the work. Save the emails where your name disappears. Save the meeting notes, even the ones that seem minor. Put dates on everything. Store it somewhere that isn't only on your work laptop. Don't react. Don't give them your anger as a weapon. Let them talk in the meetings. Let them present in the rooms. Let them call the methodology theirs, because the longer they do it, the more evidence they create. And when the moment comes, and it usually comes if you wait for it, don't make a speech. Don't confront anyone in a hallway. Don't send the email you wrote at midnight. Just put the documentation in front of the right person at the right time. 4 words can end a lot. I've had a lot of time to think about why it all unfolded the way it did. Not just the outcome, the contract, the leave, the resignation, but the whole shape of it, the arc from that Thursday afternoon email to the moment Harold turned that paper over in the conference room. What I keep coming back to is this: Sterling and Thornton didn't fail because they got unlucky. They failed because of the very thing they thought was their advantage. They believed that confidence was a substitute for substance. That if you presented something with enough polish and enough authority, nobody would look underneath. And for a long time, in a lot of rooms, that probably worked for them. It had worked enough times that they stopped being careful. That's the thing about shortcuts. They don't announce themselves as shortcuts. They feel like efficiency. They feel like strategy. You take someone else's framework, you put your name on it, you present it in front of the right people, and if nobody pushes back, you start to believe the work was yours all along. Sterling had done this before. I could tell from how relaxed he was about it. There was no anxiety in how he reassigned me, no hesitation in that email. He wrote, per our discussion, about a conversation that never happened, and he hit send without a second thought. That level of comfort only comes from practice. What he didn't account for was me being exactly as disciplined as I was. Not because I'm exceptional. I'm not. I'm just someone who had watched what happens when you react too fast and leave yourself without anything to stand on. I had seen that before. So I did the slow thing instead of the satisfying thing, and those are almost never the same thing. That discipline, sitting on the anger, downloading the files, waiting 5 months, that wasn't natural for me. I want to be honest about that. There were nights I wanted to walk into Sterling's office and put every document on his desk and watch his face. There was a version of this story where I did exactly that, and in that version, I'm probably not on this contract right now. I'm probably gone, labeled as difficult, and Thornton is the lead on a $340 million federal deal that I built from the ground up. Intelligence without patience is just noise. You can be the smartest person in the room and still lose if you spend your knowledge too soon, in the wrong moment, on the wrong audience. What made the difference wasn't that I had the documentation, it was that I waited until I had the right person in the right room at the right time to see it. Patricia. Harold, the agency reviewer who asked exactly the question that needed to be asked. Timing is a form of wisdom that doesn't get talked about enough, and the integrity part, that one's simpler. I helped Thornton with that briefing document when he asked. I corrected errors in his draft sections. I kept doing good work even when that work was being absorbed into someone else's name. Not because I was naive, because the moment I stopped doing good work, I stopped being right. My credibility in that final room was built on 9 years of doing what I said I would do. You can't fake that with metadata. It either exists or it doesn't. I think about Sterling now without bitterness, which surprised me when I first noticed it. What he built, the image, the network, the borrowed authority, wasn't durable, and he probably knew that somewhere. You always know when what you have isn't really yours. What you build from the ground up doesn't have that problem.